Call the meeting to order. I think we'll first thank you everybody for showing up today. Great interest in this particular topic, I take it. So what I'd like to do is we'll do introductions around the tables, and then Brenda Derrick will start us off. So Tim Mahoney, Mayor, Fargo.
Aaron Hill, President of the Fargo Park Board.
Vicki Dawson, Fargo Park Board.
Joe Deutsch, Fargo Park Board. Ooh, that was loud.
Jerry Rosted, Fargo Park Board.
Zoe Apsey, Fargo Park Board.
Jeff Gonkelman, Attorney for the Park District.
Ryan Erickson, Fire Marshal with the Fargo Fire Department.
Dave Cebulski, Fargo PD Chief.
Jan Eliason, Harm Reduction Programs, Fargo Cast Public Health.
Jen Fall, Director of Fargo Cast Public Health.
Chandler Esslinger, Community Liaison for Fargo Cast Public Health in the Harm Reduction Division.
Brenda Derrick, Assistant City Administrator.
Susan Foss, Executive Director of the Fargo Park District.
Dave Beets, Deputy Director, Fargo Park District.
Ben Dow, Fargo Public Works Director.
Mike Rethinger, City Administrator, Fargo.
Nancy Morris, City Attorney.
Dave Pepcorn, Fargo City Commission.
John Strand, Fargo City Commission.
Michelle Turnberg, Fargo City Commission.
Denise Kolpak, Fargo City Commission.
Well, good afternoon. We had to add a couple more tables to fit the whole group and make sure we fit everyone comfortably, but I think it's really exciting to see the collaboration between Park Board and City Commission, knowing that this impacts both of our properties, especially along the river corridor. It truly does take a collaborative effort to determine our path forward. The staff that we have at the table, along with those in the front row, have been working diligently over the last year to explore ways to improve our homeless camp situation along the river for the safety of all of us. Unfortunately, there's not an easy answer that can solve this situation. Chronic homelessness has been with us for many years, but we have seen its growth increase significantly, and it will take us time to work towards a solution. So as we looked at Path Forward, we asked ourselves the following questions. Where should the people camping outside go? Where shall they go? How will they get there? Where will we store their belongings? And then we asked ourselves, how do we think holistically and long-term about what will have the most positive impact on the entire community? How do we ensure we are not simply moving people sleeping outside from one neighborhood to another? And how do we manage the capacity and resource limitations with law enforcement and jail space if a no camping ordinance is passed? With the no camping ordinance currently, along with insufficient housing for unhoused, we also asked ourselves, do we want to allow camping along the river if they are not engaging in Fargo services? And do we want to allow camping only in certain areas where the engagement services are available and accessible? We all had a shared goal to safely and effectively address homeless camps and prevent the return of homeless camps once they are removed. Homeless camps are not a new problem to Fargo and have existed in some capacity throughout our community for decades. Over the last several years, the number of people experiencing homelessness in Fargo has surpassed the number of shelter beds available in the region. This means that there is a small population of individuals in our community who do not have a permanent residence or access to shelter and therefore regularly are sleeping outside. With the recent weather patterns and high river levels, it has created conditions where the unhoused individuals who camp outside have needed to move to higher ground. This means that camps that typically may have gone unnoticed by the public are now more likely to be seen on our public property, which has been the main driver of our complaints. Knowing that we have a mixture of property owners along the river corridor between Park and city, we think it is important that we find a policy path that provides consistency in the response to homeless camps throughout each parcel for a uniform approach to engagement and enforcement activities. For several years, the ongoing litigation of Johnson versus Grants Pass did slow down the clearing of camps in many cities throughout the United States. On June 28th, 2024, the U.S. Supreme Court ultimately overturned the Ninth Circuit ruling on Johnson's versus Grants Pass, determining that it was not cruel and unusual punishment to arrest or fine individuals experiencing homelessness for sleeping in public. It is important to note that Grants Pass ruling allows cities to arrest or fine homeless people for sleeping outside, but it does not require it. Through research on how communities across the nation have responded to homeless camps, city staff have been able to provide education on the opportunities and challenges associated with addressing homeless camps. Although forced camp removal may temporarily reduce the number of visible homeless camps in a community, without available alternatives like shelter or housing, homeless camps continually resurface only just a few yards away where they existed before, or relocate to another neighborhood within the city. When camps are removed, cities are frequently required by law or ordinance to store belongings found during a camp cleanup for designated periods of time to give the individual the opportunity to retrieve their personal effects. Fargo's current ordinance would require a 60-day holding period for personal items. Additional storage would also need to be purchased or acquired to meet the increased need. Meeting expectations of storage requirements in combination with a continual resurgence and removal of homeless camps is a time-consuming and expensive use of city resources that does not address the underlying reason why homeless camps exist. Over time, utilizing forced camp removal only as a strategy to address homeless camps can ultimately prolong someone's homelessness and increase the number of people experiencing homelessness in the community, as sufficient shelter and housing has not been made available. No community in the nation has seen success in reducing the overall number of homeless camps or homeless individuals by using solely a forced camp removal approach.
So we'd like to provide a little bit of background on the current and past management of homeless camps. Outreach to homeless camps in our community has been ongoing, but in 2016, the city did create an outreach-specific position within the harm reduction division, which has eventually evolved to include our mobile outreach program and also the downtown heart team. Historically, the Fargo Park District and the city of Fargo did conduct periodic cleanings of homeless camps. But in 2023, we began collaborative meetings with harm reduction, police, fire, public works, and Fargo Park staff to discuss ways to manage the camps moving forward. Currently, we have been able to map and track camps internally, which allows harm reduction staff and other departments to maintain awareness of camp locations as well as the individuals who are occupying them. So the city has been utilizing Fargo One as our online reporting application, which now includes options to report both homeless camps or individuals sleeping outside in a place not meant for human habitation. Those reports are submitted directly to the Harm Reduction Division for processing and follow-up. So this outlines a little bit of what the current Fargo One reporting process looks like and how harm reduction manages those reports. You can see on the bottom left, that's a screenshot of Fargo One, and there is that new option for homelessness, which includes both options to report homeless tents or camps and unsheltered individuals. So a City of Fargo resident can make a report in Fargo One. The Harm Reduction Division receives the Fargo One report and acknowledges that it's been received. The outreach team makes every effort to contact the camp within 2 business days. We then collect information on the homeless camp, who's living there, what their needs are, and we are providing some high-level expectations for the homeless camps based on a draft. And that information is submitted into ArcGIS, which allows us to have an updated map of camp activity. So that updated map of camp activity is really crucial, especially we consider the best practices for ending homelessness, which include understanding how many people are experiencing homelessness in our community, who they are, and where they tend to reside. So the harm reduction outreach team does utilize that best practice evidence-based process to manage that data and information on homeless camps. It's also used to track whether or not a systematic reduction in the number of people experiencing homelessness is occurring. And it allows the outreach team to maintain awareness of the individuals living unsheltered in the community through that mapping technology, which allows us to have the camps also Fargo 1 reports, as well as those outreach-initiated camp interactions. So if pathways to permanent housing were made available to those living in homeless camps, this data that's currently being collected would allow us to demonstrate if a systematic reduction in unsheltered homelessness is occurring, if those living outside were returning to homelessness once they've been housed, as well as identifying if any new camps emerge once they've been removed from a specific area.
So going forward, knowing that we have between parks property and city property, there's a multitude of different public property that we're working with. We are looking at, we could enact an ordinance that does not allow camping on public property unless by resolution. And then we would look to enact a resolution that would temporarily authorize homeless camps with parameters only while sufficient shelter and housing is not available. So these parameters could include a sunset review, they could outline temporary authorized camping areas, and or it could include a priority of enforcement locations. It could require rules, or it could require a permit. So that's what we've seen. Minneapolis, they require a permit. We would have to figure out for staffing how to manage permits. It could require time restrictions. Some cities have done where they can only camp at night, although that would not follow best practices on how to address and permanently remove homeless camps.
So as you can see on the screen, this is a draft flowchart of what management of homeless camps could look like going forward based on the recommendations of the Commission and Park Board. So currently, the camp is identified either through those outreach-initiated interactions or the Fargo 1 reports. Camp contact is made within 2 business days, and then we would determine whether or not the camp was willing to be engaged or currently engaged in outreach or downtown engagement center services. Regardless of where the camp is located, if they were unwilling to engage in outreach services or with the downtown engagement center, that camp would not be allowed and a notice of removal would be provided, and then the camp would ultimately be removed. If the homeless camp was willing to be engaged in deck services and the outreach team, but they were in an unacceptable camping location, the harm reduction outreach team would work on the camp to relocate within 3 business days. And if they were willing to continue to be engaged in services, we would work with them on those housing first pathways to permanent housing. However, if the camp were to refuse to relocate, they would not be allowed to camp there. They would receive a notice of removal and the camp would be removed. If the camp is engaged in deck services and in an acceptable camping location area based on the parameters outlined in the resolution, again, the outreach team would continue to stay engaged with that camp, ensure they are following all of the expectations and that pathways to housing or shelter are provided when available. I also wanted to mention, I'll go back real quick. The red box really shows right now where the management of homeless camps ends. Right now, without further direction from Commission or the Park Board, we can really only continue to do outreach. And so this flow chart then again outlines what could be possible moving forward. So with those draft ordinance expectations that would come with a resolution, they would include both guidance for those people who are living in homeless camps, as well as what predictable support they would receive from the outreach team in the downtown engagement center. And those things could look like what are the geographic locations of where camps are temporarily authorized, how much distance must be between camps to keep them safe and orderly, a commitment to camp cleanliness, a commitment to safety and nonviolence, and again, that expectation to engage with the outreach team and downtown engagement center programming. We also wanted to highlight how our current approach thus far aligns with the United States Interagency Council on Homelessness best practices for addressing encampments. The first step is to establish a cross-agency multi-sector response, which we have done by engaging fellow departments in this process. We have engaged encampment residents to develop solutions, so they have been providing feedback on whether or not these expectations would be, they'd be able to comply. Conduct comprehensive and coordinated outreach. Again, that has been able to be accomplished through our outreach team, those updated Fargo 1 reports and camp mapping. Address basic needs and provide storage. So we can do some basic needs addressing right now through the engagement center and the outreach team, but again, additional storage would need to be provided. Ensure access to shelter or housing options. Again, that is a constraint we have in our community right now, and so we would need to look to develop pathways to permanent housing and support, again, to ensure that camps, once removed, do not return to that location. And communities that have been successful in removing encampments altogether also make plans for those campsites after they've been closed to ensure camps do not return.
So some communities have been able to reduce the number of homeless camps and decrease the overall number of individuals experience homelessness in their community through housing-focused camp closures. Communities that are able to supply individuals who are experiencing homelessness access to permanent housing are less likely to see a resurgence in homeless camps because the need for shelter or housing has been met. When communities utilize a housing-focused camp closure strategy in combination with a housing-first approach, providing immediate access to housing and wraparound services, a return to homelessness can be completely avoided. Communities that have been successful in eliminating homeless camps also develop plans for how the areas where camping commonly occurs will be used moving forward to decrease the likelihood of a return to homeless camps. The only proven way to safely permanently eliminate homeless camps is to ensure those experiencing homelessness, specifically unsheltered homelessness, have access to housing and the supportive services they need to maintain housing stability and prevent a return to homelessness.
So as Brenda mentioned, we can achieve housing-focused camp closures through the utilization of a housing-first approach and a master leasing strategy. So housing first is an approach that identifies that rapid movement into permanent housing combined with wraparound services is the most efficient and effective way to end an individual's homelessness and keep them stably housed. Master leasing is a strategy that communities use to create a scattered site network of available housing stock. And together, housing first and master leasing allow communities to quickly move unhoused people into permanent housing despite outside market pressures and other barriers that homeless individuals experience, which ultimately ends their homelessness. As a reminder, this is what was presented to City Commission and was approved for us to explore a few meetings ago. Approved to explore a master lease strategy of 10 or more scattered site units throughout Fargo, which of course would require partnership with one or more property managers. These 10 or more master leased units would be used to move people who are currently camping outside directly into permanent housing, again, ending their homelessness. The pilot project would also include a case manager to oversee the movement into permanent housing and provision of those support services, including connection to community-based resources. And although we have seen an increase in individuals living unsheltered, movement of at least 10 individuals into permanent housing would reduce the unsheltered homeless population along the river by an estimated 25%.
And so I did want to bring leadership back to the questions that staff had asked ourselves as we worked through potential paths forward. And so as we work through these questions, we have come in to have the ability to manage the camps for the safety of all while working towards a Housing First program. We are coming back with a no camping ordinance on public property except by resolution. And that resolution right now that is in draft outlines where camping enforcement would begin. So we would start with critical infrastructure and then within close proximity to the bike trail. And then it would have guidelines that outline the expectations. And then we are also continuing to work on developing a Fargo Streets to House pilot project. And so from there, I would really like to, before we close it out, I would like to open it up for discussion. And so I guess maybe I'll expand a little bit. So one of the things that we're really looking for is what leadership would like to see. And so we have not been able to have this collaborative effort, knowing that we're trying to provide so that it doesn't matter which parcel you're on throughout the river corridor. So how do we want that to look like? So we're really looking for that input from leadership on what that should look like.
So we have shared space with the park board. So Aaron, it's kind of a question. We're curious what the park board, I think you've been working on this as well. Does it make sense to you, or where are we at? What we'd like to do, I think, Brenda, is best practice. So we don't have the chief try to arrest people, put them in jail, and they don't have space in the jail, so we don't get anywhere. I think the other comments I heard sometimes is somebody gets a fine, that they tear up the piece of paper and doesn't change any behavior. So I'm not sure where the park board stands on this as well, because you've been good partners with us, as far as I understand.
I guess not to necessarily speak for the park board or the park district, but I mean, I have a lot of questions, and obviously this is, it's a very sensitive topic, and thank you for bringing all of us together. So essentially the city is looking to sort of create an ordinance potentially tonight, is that correct, at the meeting tonight?
It would be the first, it would be presented to the commission. We would no action this time. The quickest we could ever take action is 2 weeks first reading.
Okay.
So.
And then it would be sort of no camping outside of, or I guess there would be potentially camping allowed, but enforcement within 100 feet or 30 feet, meaning what is the clarification on the enforcement areas, I guess?
So Brenda, for the question of enforcement.
So is it like if you're 101 feet outside of critical infrastructure, then there's no enforcement, but if it's 98 feet or, or if you're 31 feet away from a bike trail, no enforcement, 29 feet, yes? Is that?
So what we've been seeing, just to give you an example, so we've been watching, right now Brainerd is working through a no camping ordinance, Duluth is working through a no camping ordinance, and knowing that you don't have the staffing, nor do we have the place to put the people camping. And there's a high potential of them relocating somewhere within the city. How do we create an ordinance and then have stepping stones of how it gets enforced? So if we look at where we're hearing most of our feedback, it's where the trails come in tight with the bridges. So if we can get them away from the critical infrastructure and open that up a little bit, that should help. And so the resolutions they can come at one meeting and be heard and changed. The ordinance is a 30-day process. So we wanted to keep the ordinance clean with a resolution of what does leadership want to see.
Mr. Chair, can I speak? So to me, I just think we're making this way too confusing. And I think to have the park district here with us, we wanted to talk about camping, and to make this into a homeless propaganda, that's not appropriate. To me, this should be very simple. Camping is not allowed, and it's not just homeless, it's everybody. To me, we're just talking about one group. No, this is for everybody. And to me, camping should not be allowed on public property other than the campground at Lindenwood, where we have showers, restrooms. What we want along the river, we want it to be clean and safe. Right now, it is not clean and safe. I have a phone full of comments, and I'm sure you've heard them too. It's not clean and safe. It's gonna be clean and safe. And what's happening now, we're hearing from people, they have a conflict of interest. They want this to continue. This thing about us watching people's belongings that's ridiculous. How did we get in the business of storing people's property? So to me, there's lots of things that need to change, but the first thing is it needs to be very simple. There's no camping on public property other than designated campgrounds. I like having it simple. To me, all the rest of this is not appropriate at this time. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
And Dave, the park board's involved because they have land that people camp on, so it has to be both of us working together, and also the park board helps us enforce. So it's working together with them as well as the police force as well. So that's part of the element as well as gets into it. So that's why we're all here today, because we could have them not be on public ground for the city and they go over to the public ground for the park board. I don't know if you have that one map where it shows where the park board is next to your city hall. Do you have a map for that, just to show us? And Chandra, I just had a question. You have a GPS of where people are camping? Is a lot of it down by the downtown?
The majority is, yes.
In the downtown area?
And along the river near downtown, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And yeah, I mean, ideally, there's a, the black and white issue of there's no camping, we need to enforce it. But that's the number one question when you talk to people about sort of a policy is like, well, where will the people go, right?
Chief Zabowski, what is the issue with Mr. Pepcorn's comment is, how do you enforce what he's requesting?
How would we enforce a straight no camping ban?
Yes. What is it that you need in the ordinance that would help us get to clarity as far as rights and such? Because as we know, if we do take a camp, we have to store their things that they own. That's by law. That's not something that we can just throw away. That's one of the things we learned. Jan's got piles of storage over there that we save people's things because we're not supposed to throw them away. But what is the issue of filling jails versus doing something else?
Well, we wouldn't be able to arrest everyone that wouldn't leave. Jail doesn't have capacity. We still don't get everyone into the jail right now. So the best we wouldn't have an option to physically move all of them. And on the other side of the coin, once they're in the jail and then they're out of the jail, they would probably be right back to that same environment. So I think we may not be solving the entire problem just through that process. The other issue is that when you close a camp, there is case law that we have to safeguard that property in some fashion or the city's liable for that loss. And I'm sure Nancy could talk a little bit more about that. So we've discussed options depending on what direction the commission wishes to go on this. But we would likely have to establish some type of storage facilities for this property so that they could have an opportunity to claim it. And if not claimed in 60 days, we would follow the state statute on discarding, getting rid of the property.
Where does the 60 days come from? Was that
State statute.
At a state
Yes,
statute?
state statute, century code, yeah. Our city attorney has researched that for us as well.
Appreciate it.
Mr. Mayor, I got a couple of questions. How many people do we have a handle of how many people we're talking about that fall into this category?
Yeah, our outreach team has identified that there are about 40 individuals who are consistently sleeping outside along the river.
So do any of these people overwinter outside?
Yes.
They do?
Mm-hmm.
How many is that? 20, 10?
Well, we did have the winter warming center available this past winter, so there were fewer folks who were forced to sleep outside. However, there are always a handful of people because there isn't sufficient shelter housing availability who will sleep outside year-round.
Do we know, curiosity too, are we able to understand where the individuals are? Are they from North Dakota? Are they from the Midwest? Are they coming in from other communities? Maybe other people are hearing the same rumors that I am, that different communities are giving people bus tickets to go to certain communities. Is there any validity to that? Or I'm just curious as to what kind of data, if you will, we have.
Yeah, when our outreach team is connecting with the individuals who are sleeping outside, they ask some of those questions, and we know the vast majority of those individuals are from our community. They became homeless in our community. Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you.
So in the spring then, do we see people coming from inside places because they're overwintering? I find it challenging to live outside in the North Dakota winter. I can't stand living here sometimes when I have a house, but when spring hits, are they coming from somewhere where they're being housed at that time? And is there a way we can capture that and keep them from leaving?
So there are a couple different factors. So during the wintertime, we do know it is deadly. Like I mentioned, we did have the Winter Warming Center available this year, which did allow for an alternative sheltering option that we've never had in our community before. So that was very important. So people also are very creative and will leverage every potential resource they have during the winter months when it is deadly to find a place to stay. Sometimes that is also a place not meant for human habitation. It just might not be along the river. The other factor is that we are having consistent inflow into homelessness. So people are finding themselves in facing an eviction and don't have anywhere else to go because the shelters are full. So it's kind of a combination of factors that are contributing to what we're seeing now, but it's mostly because there's no other place for people to be.
So are our shelters currently at capacity?
Correct.
So these 40 people could not go to any of our local shelters?
Correct.
Chair, a couple questions.
Mr. Kopak.
So I know that you talked to a number of other cities and communities, and really, I think the approach was to put together best practices of what has worked and what hasn't in those other communities, which are regionally. These aren't from the East and West Coast, but we talked to communities around the Midwest. Can you share some of the lessons learned from those conversations is my first question.
Yeah, so we have seen a number of communities begin to pass no camping ordinances, and many have actually had them on the books prior to grants pass. What we know is that when a community only uses a no camping ordinance to move camps, that is not a long-term strategy that successfully keeps camps from returning to those locations. What most communities see is that the camp may be removed temporarily. That camp will no longer be in that location, but they will move to an area often just a few yards away from where their camp was before, or they will move to a different part of the community. And so if we think about, other locations in the community where people would camp, we might be seeing camps in those locations instead of where they are now. So kind of just pushing it from one area to another. We also heard an example from St. Cloud where they did pass a no camping ordinance, and then they tried to have a sanctioned encampment where all of the people who had been living outside were living in a confined area, like a parking lot, and that was unsuccessful. They eventually had to reverse their ordinance and allow camping again. And so that's what we see many communities struggle with. It's not necessarily, is it about a no camping ordinance or not? It's kind of how do we ensure that there are alternatives to living outside for individuals if shelter is not sufficient in the community.
Go ahead,
If
Brenda.
I can
Just
add,
one question. So to Mr. Popcorn's idea of moving Lindenwood Park, do you have a capacity for 40 to 50 people?
We do not. During the camping season, we're at or near capacity pretty regularly.
Thank you. Go ahead.
so can I just quick add? So we have been visiting, we've even visited with Moorhead, and then we've been seeing the Minnesota no camping there's quite a few no camping ordinance between the Brainards and the Duluth. The one thing they have different than we do though is their park boards are under their city ordinances. And so in North Dakota, we're just different because, and I'll let the police chief jump in, if I've heard our discussion right, where it differs is that our police will enforce city ordinances. They don't enforce park ordinances. And so that's where we're trying to figure out, a collaborative approach of how we're going to handle this.
Go ahead.
Okay. My second question is, around enforcement and then ultimately monitoring the success of the program. So can you speak a little bit to the day-to-day enforcement of these proposed rules that are outlined in the resolution? Really speak to safety for everyone in the community, both those who are experiencing homelessness, but also those who aren't. And it's really about that primary focus is truly on public safety and adhering to those rules. So when someone breaks the rules, day-to-day enforcement, how will that be executed? And my question about the 48-hour requirement for notice of camp removal is, do we have an ordinance in place that requires 48 hours? If someone has broken a rule, you know, what are the criteria for removal then, because they've broken the rules and they're not using the services provided? So I'll stop right there and have you answer those questions.
I guess I'm going to start. And then the
Question is,
chief can
Chief, if
follow
someone's
in.
breaking the rules
And-
and being unsafe to the public, do they have to wait 40 hours to have those people removed from a campsite?
So I think, so it's going to be a three-legged answer.
Okay.
And so, you know, how we have seen this process look is that we have outreach happening with the camps, and it'll be tracked and monitored. And at some point, there's going to be a handover. And then it would be handed over to police because we're not adhering to whatever that ends up being. And I think that's the question. So we do have to provide some sort of notification. So we would tag the camp that it will be removed, give them time to clean up and pick up and move and leave, or it's going to be removed. And so I'll let the police chief jump in where I got something wrong.
No, I'm not, no, I think it's a complicated question. It's a good question. So I think from the police department perspective, the process as the ladies have gone through requires notice. And then, so if a camp has noticed that in 48 hours you need to be out of here, or you're in violation of the no camping ordinance, that would be posted 48 hours. We would devise a methodology to come and remove that camp. In between that time, a lot of these folks would be engaged with those campers to get them to a location that's not, if we go with proposed language, in a critical infrastructure place or some other place that would be prohibited. And so those that are left behind or that don't leave, that would be an enforcement. That would be an arrest for that infraction, whether or not we can take them to the jail or whether or not we or just arrest them and take them to our PD where we have to book and release them there because we don't have any holding facility. We'd at least remove them. But as part and parcel of that, we're responsible to safeguard their property, whatever that is. And that is a second problem to be dealt with, both in terms of collecting and what's important, but also in terms of storage and allowing access to them so they can come back and get it once they're either out of jail or they decide to move somewhere else. I think in terms of the groups that choose to go to locations that are identified and are required to work with the deck, but then don't work with the deck, they would be camping in a place that's allowed, but if they're not following that particular rule, I'll defer to the city attorney, but I would imagine that the deck would be the trespasser for those people, and then we would follow a trespassing type of approach, but I'll defer to the city attorney.
What's the deck or deck? What is that?
Engagement Center.
Oh, that's it. Thank you.
Yeah, that's the Downtown Engagement Center. Yeah, so some of the materials in the ordinance as proposed are policy decisions for your consideration as the decision makers. A lot of the discussion has been around due process, letting them know that they're not allowed to camp there. And then once they are aware of that, giving them the opportunity to move, take their things with them if they leave things behind. We do have an ordinance in Fargo Municipal Code 280101 that discusses things that are found on public property being turned over to the police. They can then retrieve them from there, or if it's not retrieved, it would be sold. So there are some policy decisions that are in the proposed ordinance for your consideration as to length of notice, locations, rules. The reason for the resolution is frankly, it's easier to be more specific and adopt rules. And if those rules are being violated, then what would happen is a notice of camp removal under the ordinance would be given, and then we would move forward with those removals as well. So again, there are policy discussions and decisions that are being presented to you in the ordinance as well as to length of notice, location of camping, how best to address the priority of enforcement. That is what we're seeing happening in Duluth and Brainerd. It's a no camping ordinance, but they're looking at, well, where do we start? And that's the protection of the critical infrastructure and the safety of the public. So it's a starting point that can be expanded as housing becomes available as well.
Commissioner Kolpak.
This is my last comment. And so is it fair, is it fair to say that those 40 that have been identified are all homeless? Yes. So the two are very much connected with the current camping situation. My question is, did you have conversations about monitoring the success? Because to me, this seems like the discussion was really about solving a root cause problem here. But how are we going to know we're being successful and that it's working? And how do we monitor that success? And how do we make changes as needed if something isn't working as intended?
Thank you for the question, Commissioner Kolpak. So that's part of why we have the mapping infrastructure that we have currently, is to understand where camps are and who is occupying them. We would then be able to track the systematic reductions in those camps or the continued re-emergence of homeless camps. So we would know if we were able to successfully move 10 individuals into permanent housing, are they maintaining that housing, or are they unable to maintain housing and camping again? But what we know is that when housing is provided with the appropriate supportive services, that return to homelessness is extremely unlikely at rates of 90% or higher. And so that is the goal. And so the data that we have in monitoring that camps through the mapping system would allow us to see all of that and whether or not we're having a positive impact.
Commissioner Turnberg.
I'd first of all like to recognize all you're doing with the Housing First, and thank you for that. But I'm wondering, are we making it too easy to be homeless in Fargo? I mean, I'm getting calls every single day from residents who are taxpayers and have an expectation of safety. And I used to run on that trail every day under the First Avenue Bridge, and it took me 5 people, asking 5 different people just to have someone to walk down there during the middle of the day to have a look at it. And I had a look at it, and it was terrible. I've had residents contact me where they have, they're afraid to use the trails. They've come across naked people, been attacked by people, watched drugs being used. There's defecating and urinating into the river, which is our drinking water, being asked for needles, being chased on trails. I think we have to remember not only safety for the homeless, but we need safety for our residents and our taxpayers and people who expect to be safe in Fargo. And I think that is one of the main reasons we're here. Every day I'm getting calls and emails. And I think that is a huge problem, and we really need to address that going forward.
So the question is, if you pass this ordinance, no camping public grounds, 100 feet, 30 feet, does that help at least the park board get their trails safe, public safe to get in and about? And to Commissioner Kolpak's question, what would be our measure? So Chandler, when you say we've got 40 people down, sounds to me like all 40 would have to be moved, because does Cooper House have room for them? Do we have room throughout the system for them? Would it be systematic in which you slowly do this? Or, I mean, First Avenue Bridge, I get complaints all the time about, so I'm assuming that's an infrastructure we need to clean up anyway. But I don't know, the park board, are you guys getting complaints on your bike trails? Are people concerned about it? I see a lot of people on bikes now all over the city, right, up and down. run over me with my dog. I mean, they're all over, so my presumption is they like the bike paths and like to go through the bike paths. But just as we set expectations for the public listening today, if we did pass some type of ordinance, what would be the expectation? What would we expect to happen?
Can you restate your question again?
If we pass the ordinance, no camping in public grounds, 100 feet of infrastructure, 30 feet of trails, what would happen to the people who presently, 40 to 50 people that live there now? 48-hour notice?
I'm just gonna make sure I'm understanding your question. So right now, we have a no camping ordinance, and the resolution addresses where we would start enforcement, which is critical infrastructure. And so what you would see is our outreach would go start visiting with the people in the critical infrastructure and start having conversations about where they could be. If that gets moved forward, they would start conversations where they could be. And then we would look to either move them to a different place or we would tag them for removal.
And Nancy, if I wanted to fast track this, what's the quickest you could get this through City Commission?
Well, it is on for receive and file this evening. Of course, I think there was a discussion of whether or not the resolution reflects your policy decisions that you wish to move forward, as well as the ordinance itself. So if you waive receive and file today, it could be placed on for first reading today. And then it could be second reading in 2 weeks, and it would be published, and that would be adoption, because it has to be published because there is a penalty associated with the ordinance enactment.
Okay, Commissioner Strand, you had a comment?
I do, actually. I have several, mostly questions. Where's Minnesota? You know, we're sitting here and we have a river and we have another city, and I'm getting letters and people are saying there's camping. I'm just wondering, we can't do this absent Minnesota. I would guess not. Maybe they're doing the same thing. Maybe they're doing the same timing. I don't know. But, you know, if we don't do this at the same time and in sync with each other, I can't imagine we'll get the result we want without pushing people across the river. My first question, and then I'll go forward.
So I think, so we visited with Moorhead, we visited with St. Cloud. The difference between North Dakota and Minnesota truly is that their city ordinances govern their park property. So they're using their city ordinances, and Michael, I'll let you jump in because you were on that call. They're actually using their city ordinances to help go in if they see an environmental issue and clean up the camps.
They're doing that already?
Yes.
And are they, I'm hesitant to use this word, but people will use the word whether we like it or not. They suggest we're criminalizing homelessness. Is Minnesota penalizing homeless people on the Moorhead side?
Commissioner Strange, your question, no, I don't believe that would be the case. What they're enforcing, I'll use St. Cloud as an example. When we talk to St. Cloud, they're on their health and nuisance abatement ordinances is really what they're enforcing, trying to look to a public health standard. And so on the issue of trying to move camps or consolidate camps, the public health unit of St. Cloud, which is a 3-county area, is primarily going out and asking for people to clean up camps for sanitary reasons and for health and safety. And then they're enforcing that way. So not under a camping ban, but rather on public health. And then in Moorhead too, great conversation with Moorhead. They are taking great interest in what we're going to be talking about here because we were reminded in our conversations with our colleague over at the UMCOM Center, they also were able to kind of see into our property that is behind the flood wall that we can't see. And so we had a really good conversation about that last week and just about that need to kind of go in lockstep if there are changes on either side, that we try to do that together, especially if there's going to be an interest between the park department over there and the park board over here and park district, that we try to keep together as much as possible so there's no surprises and we do it in a coordinated fashion.
So what I'm thinking is the more we're in sync with each other across the river, the better. Not St. Cloud, but Moorhead and Minnesota. So I'd like confirmation of them and us being on the same page at the same time as much as possible. My next simple question is, what about urban hunting? We have an urban hunting program along the river. how does that fit into this whole picture?
So I'll take that, Commissioner Strand. So the wildlife management program is distinct and separate in that that's defining specific areas where you can be based on permitted hunters. That's on the City Commission's consent agenda this evening for approval. That has been underway now for several years, I believe at least the last 10 or so years, if memory serves me correctly, but separate matter, separate areas from where we're seeing some of our activities with unhoused individuals at present. It has been a program that's operated, I think, really without conflict or interaction over the last several years, but that's a kind of a separate matter.
Okay, and bear with me. I'm curious, I'm just asking, I'm not assuming anything. To what degree have we engaged lived experience, people with lived experience in the evolution of this policy?
There are a number of guests at the deck who have provided feedback, as well as other policymakers in our region who are doing similar work, and as well as people who are currently living outside who have provided feedback as to whether or not the draft expectations that may or may not be adopted would be feasible to adhere to. And there has been widespread consensus that the approach that we're taking is appropriate and does allow for an actual resolution to homeless camps. We want to make sure that whatever we do as a community is going to ultimately resolve the issue, and this is the pathway we can take to make sure that that is the case.
And you know, but for the grace of God, there go I. I don't know how many of us have ever been close to homelessness or had that maybe down the path of us, but that's a reality for 1,000 people in town. Lastly, you know, these debates in other cities and jurisdictions and all that, and we haven't mentioned much at all, really, the $1,000 fine that I think is attached to this. And that gets debated, but how does a homeless person afford $1,000? And if they get a $1,000 fine, how do we help them work through that circumstance? I mean, I want to say if there's room in the jail, and then it's $114 a day or whatever to keep them in jail. And how do we, or can they get that fine and that citation? And is it an infraction or is it a civil fine? And can they work it off? Can they get rid of it? I'm trying to get my arms around that. I don't know who can. The average citizen in this country doesn't have more than a $400 savings account. You know, how does somebody who's homeless address or concern? How do we? I mean, I'm just trying to get my arms around this. I'm not judging it.
Sure. Just for clarification, so an infraction has a fine up to $1,000. So whatever a judge imposes, anything up to $1,000. An infraction does not have any jail time with it as a penalty. And in our deliberations, that's the least penalty that we could have in the ordinance resolution that would allow the police department any enforcement action. If we could go up to a Class B misdemeanor, which is then you're into criminal territory, or you make it a non-criminal in which we can't arrest anyone, so we couldn't remove anyone. So that's really where we landed in terms of having some ability to enforce the ordinance.
And I'll just jump in on that. That's correct. That was the discussions. It's a question of how do you get to compliance if the ordinance does contain provisions of you will have notice, you will be able to move if you're not compliant with the notice and the removal and the relocation or whatever the policy decision is, then the police have enforcement authority ultimately to have ordinance in place.
Commissioner Turnberg?
I have a question for you, Chief. Within the last 2 weeks, maybe less, I believe I've gotten 3 press releases of high-risk sex offenders that are identified as homeless. So how do you keep track of them when they're homeless, and how is the public to know if they're safe?
We track them as best as we can. We actually do a lot of collaborations with public health who are aware of these people and kind of let us know where they are. It's allowed by state law that they can declare themselves homeless and be a sex offender. Other than that, that's really the only means that we have for someone who says they are homeless.
So, I mean, good discussions to have, right? We're probably not going to solve the issue in an hour. So I think we're specifically talking about camps right now, right? Homeless camps. Sounds like we have 40-ish people camping. City ordinance. I believe we have, and Jeff, correct me if I'm wrong, I think we even have our own ordinance at the Park District, correct? No parking outside of designated campgrounds.
We do have ordinances. I haven't looked through it that, but I think the biggest problem that we're having is if the police aren't going to enforce our ordinances because they're not in lockstep with the city's ordinances, then our ordinances are basically worthless. And so this whole roundtable is all about the fact that we got to get our ordinance, if we want to have an enforcement mechanism to our ordinances, for the police to be comfortable. What we're being told is we need to be in lockstep with the city.
Right. Or again, Minnesota, they don't have to because the park system is underneath the city. We have that unique relationship where we have city and parks are separate. So we kind of Park District would almost have to adopt an agreement resolution or something. Or I guess would we even have to do anything
we would
technically?
probably go through the process of amending our ordinances. Reference the city ordinance, or do something along those lines, correct?
Got it, yeah.
Just whatever, follow the city's lead on it, yes.
Yeah, and I mean, I've received, I live near the river and I use the trail, especially the Main Avenue Bridge. I went down there last week, I think, just out for my Sunday afternoon walk, and it has grown a lot. And I generally, there's not a lot of places I don't feel comfortable, and I for a second thought about sort of going around it, and I thought, no, this is a public trail that I'm using. I'm out for a walk on a Sunday afternoon, and it was, it's robust, it's full. And so to Commissioner Turnberg's point, right, it's, if people don't feel safe or comfortable using public amenities that are taxpayer, the people we represent, I mean, I think some action needs to be taken to have that. And so I know from my standpoint, I mean, it's 100 feet, 30 feet, they might move a foot over, they might move, I mean, I could see there's just, probably they're going to be shifting to different places. But then, we deal with that when they shift. Our police department more than likely will help us deal with that. But I think it'll be, some action probably needs to be taken in the interim.
We'd probably do a monthly report, then look for places, issues. I think the park board would tell us where there's issues. Engagement Center would know where there's issues as well. Many of my commissioners have asked, let's get a report on a monthly basis and see how we're doing. This is step one, and then we do step two. But we want the park board and the city to be joined. What I was trying to do about a map, this land right outside City Hall along the river is actually park board. The land that's north of there is actually city land. So it's interesting how we mix, because it doesn't mix the way you would think it would mix. First Avenue Bridge is city land, and so that map is kind of interesting, but we are locked because we intertwine all the way up and down the river.
And if I can add, I think the reason why we add a resolution to it is that it is very easily changed. It's a one meeting change. And so that's why we kept a resolution separate than the ordinance. So if we find there's a problem that needs to be addressed, it's a one meeting reading and it's addressed.
I thought the Park District was hiring their own law enforcement.
Yeah, we had a policeman that we hired 9 years ago, and we ended up giving it back to the Fargo Police Department through conversations with the chief.
Yeah, it was actually our officer. And so he was assigned to the parks, but one person's not going to handle that workload. And so we brought that person back to our department for our resource needs.
And that was just a jurisdictional thing. Help me understand too, had the Supreme Court not decided recently that this is not cruel and unusual punishment, what would we be doing then?
So My answer to that would be is we're in front of here with this. I don't think as much because of the ruling as much as the complaints we're receiving. And how do we manage those complaints? So the information I'm getting from leadership on the concerns along the river is why we're discussing this matter, is how do we manage it? And if you look at that flow chart, outreach can only do so much because there's nothing behind them to support it. And so to say that, no, you have to keep it clean, you have to put your garbage out, we'll collect it, but you have to put your garbage out. Those types of things, we don't have anything behind it supporting them through that flow chart. And so we can go a little ways and we can gather information and we can do outreach, but right now we have nothing behind us to keep us moving.
Commissioner Pipcorn?
So, Mr. Chair, the priority is public safety. That's our responsibility, and then that's what we have to act on. And the river corridor, we want it to be active. The park district, the bike trails, we've invested a lot of money, and it's going to grow when the diversion gets done. There's going to be more and more with that corridor. It has to be clean and safe. That's the bottom line. All the rest of this, I do think there's some tweaking. To give you an example, I agree. Like, I read that there was going to be a $1,000 fine. That's not appropriate. If a speeding fine is $20, how do you have it be a $1,000 fine? It should be something in line with what, like the park board, it's $35 a night for camping. So 50, do you get what I'm saying? So to me, that's appropriate. And the whole storage of property, that's nonsense. We have to get rid of that. That is complete nonsense. To have us in the business of storing people's stuff for the city, imagine how much we're spending and then what we would have to spend additionally. So there's some things that we have to change, but the bottom line is our river corridor has to be clean and safe, and it is not right now. It is dangerous. There's drugs, there's violence. That's not Fargo, and that's not going to continue. So we have to act, and that includes the park district. And the main reason we're here is so we're all on the same page. And we all know the corridor, that's very important to us, and it's beautiful. And so I appreciate the time. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Vicki Dawson?
So do you have any guidelines you're planning on utilizing for the size of a camp, limiting the size of a camp that will be part of this? Okay, what will it be?
You can say out loud so the public can hear. They can't see the shaking head.
Yes, so the draft expectations for homeless camps were included in the City Commission agenda for this evening, so you could access them there. We are proposing that no more than 3 individuals can be in a camp, and there would also be a requirement of distance between camps as well as distance from the path. And so that is to address some of those safety and cleanliness concerns. Again, those expectations would need to be abided by in order for individuals to continue to be authorized to camp for this temporary period of time. And that is so that we don't further deepen someone's homelessness crisis as we're trying to address this overall issue. So I would just want to ensure that our shared goal is eliminating homeless camps in our community. And this is kind of the systematic way that you are able to do that based on the evidence we have from other communities.
So the big elephant in the room is if we had a shelter that had 100 empty beds, we'd have no problem with homelessness in our community?
Unfortunately, no. This isn't inherently a shelter issue. The reason why we have this problem is because we have insufficient access to permanent housing. And so until that becomes addressed, until we have sufficient housing available for people who need it, regardless of the number of shelter beds that are available, we will continue to see these types of issues. And so again, trying to promote and help folks understand that housing is how we will prevent any homeless camps or any people from living unsheltered in our community.
I totally understand that public safety is number one. I mean, I do safety for a living. The reality is what we're doing is not working. So doing nothing we're going to get more of what we have. So it sounds like you guys have at least an idea of, let's give something a shot and at least try to move in the right direction. Right now, we're not getting anywhere doing nothing. So, and if it's a resolution, we can adapt and ebb and flow as we need to. When you say, that didn't work, let's switch to this. You got to do something.
Yep, yeah.
That was very similar comments that I was going to make earlier. And to me, these rules really are all about safety for everyone. And there's expectations that have to be followed. And it is starting to address the core problem here that we're dealing with and going beyond defining the problem, but really looking for some ways to address the issues in a practical way. And so, believe me, I 100% support that safety of the community is one of our #1 priorities and support that.
A question I have is, doesn't the Park District already have dusk hours? The parks close at 10 or dusk? Aren't those ordinances on the books?
Yes, they are.
So what's the enforcement of that?
Well, other than potentially our own staff that don't have police authority to them, it would be dependent on the police department, which.
And I don't think the issue we're discussing today is necessarily people camping in the parks. You know, it's not, people are.
Well, if
in
they're there
Lindenwood
after
or-
10 and after dusk, they're after that's closed.
Correct, yep.
So isn't that already unallowable?
Yes, correct. And that is
what,
enforced.
I'm just curious, it's not enforceable?
That is enforced. I was on a police ride along actually, and we went through Lindenwood Park, and we did a ride along through the park. So that is enforced. Like the issue we're talking about is the camps that are along the river on Park District or
After
city
10
limits.
o'clock or after dusk?
What's that?
I think,
They're out there after dusk. I mean, I'm just sorry, but
well, the reality is the police department is not going to focus their efforts on, well, somebody's staying in the park a little bit too late. I think they have bigger fish to fry. And so we're looking for a solution of what's the long-term solution to people who are homeless and camping where they're causing public concern and public harm. So, and I think that's what this group today is trying to help us solve, is let's find some steps on what we can try.
and my point is, we already have some ordinances on the books, perhaps, that could give us some result if we enforce them, if that's what we're trying to do.
I think that's the whole issue right now, is there are ordinances, we have ordinances that aren't being enforced, right? And I think that's our discussion right now is how do we start enforcing in a manner that is sensitive to these questions, right?
So the next steps that I read it, we're going to present this tonight at City Commission. It's going to be the first step in this, and it's a new ordinance, it's enforceable. The $1,000 fine doesn't always have to be $1,000. The judge can cut that to 50, 45, whatever it has to be. It just goes with the particular misdemeanor charge that's there. We would hope they would be charitable if that became an issue, if somebody can't afford it. But this would be the first step. This would be an ordinance with some enforceability. Right now, the chief has no enforceability at this point. It would go to the City Commission tonight for discussion, and we could move that forward to a rather quicker resolution by being able to, again, revote it in 2 weeks, and it goes into effect at that point. Nancy, is that correct?
And once you adopt it, then
you will adopt it as well?
Yeah.
Chief?
I was only going to comment in terms of the ordinances, being in the park after dusk is likely not an arrestable offense. And for any ordinance that you have on your books, if the city commission hasn't adopted or approved those, we don't have enforcement. And so that's just a different issue to fix, but.
And to follow up with that, I mean, we have parks and we have park district property. And I would not consider the area along the river down there to be a park, all of it. So we're not opening, and as the chief said, we have a staff member that goes around like to the skate park area across from Island Park at dusk and shuts the lights off and just kind of moves through that area to keep people moving on to the place that they originally came from that morning. This is not the same situation.
My last question is West Fargo at the table? I mean, are we working as well with West Fargo? I've asked about Moorhead in Minnesota.
We'll share the information with West Fargo.
Say that again?
We'll share it with West Fargo. Allow them to look at this as well.
We need them at the table helping shape these policies.
Brenda, are you okay?
Loaded question.
Did we get everything done?
No, I just, yeah, we had to add a table. Anyway, no, I want to thank everyone here. And this isn't a one meeting and done. We expect to continue this conversation. And I mean, we all have the same goal, is to help increase the safety for all and to reduce our homeless camps along the river. So I think we do truly have the same goal. So I do appreciate everyone being at the table, and we will continue this conversation.
Thank you.
Oh, and Chandler would like to say one thing.
Thank you. I want to express my gratitude as well for everybody being at the table today. And I would just also like to acknowledge that we are in a really unique position here in our community. There are precious few communities left in our nation who have time to turn back the clock on homelessness and prevent the explosion that we've seen in other communities. And this is where we start. We integrate the lessons learned from other communities, and we do better now that we know better. And this is a pathway forward for all of us to ensure that our entire community is benefiting from the ordinances and policies that we have. Thank you.
Thank you. We stand adjourned.